Welcome to another installment of my short story. This is about a magic seed and the magic plant that grows from it. As usual, I'm starting on the very first page of the rough draft where I have all my links, but I also have the goals. I want to just read these, remind myself. I want to focus on sensory details. I want to constantly move through a scene. The figurative language is focused on farming and family. Keep it whimsical, fantastic. Still haven't thought of a title. I want to tighten the point of view, show us more into Rick's mind, which I've been doing, and it's making the story way too long. Way too long. But that's because I'm exploring the relationship, number 7, between Rick and each member of his family. So, just to remind myself, Rick and Nikki. Nikki wants more responsibility, wants to be seen as a man, but still acts childish. Rick and Faye. Faye doesn't have a lot of responsibility. She's very protective of her magic seed, even when it might be dangerous. She's always getting her way, and so Rick struggles to defy her when it comes to this possibly dangerous plan. Rick and Mary, his elder daughter, just all I have so far is playful, teasing relationship. That one hasn't developed too much. And then Rick and his wife, I want quick instances of their love for each other, but I need to explore the tension and the conflict. So that's going to come through the kids, the relationships that Rick has with the kids, her not necessarily approving of ways that he interacts with them, probably especially Nikki because he's the oldest, and also especially Faye because she's the youngest, and then Mary, the middle one. Middle kids, they get kind of lost between the other two. So that's something she'll talk about. Oh, sorry. I forgot to take medicine. Yay, that's a fun highlight. Me taking medicine. I have a headache. So I have all of that stuff that I need to think about. But I feel like that especially came along. Writing the goals really helps because I was working on part 3 offline. Everything that's sort of gold are changes that I made. So let's look at those really quickly. After the birthday celebration, so I wanted to add that little bit of transition. Part 2 is a birthday celebration. Part 3, let's remember that. And then say life on the farm slid back into routine. I wanted to start in the morning, transition to the afternoon, and end with the night. That's part of it. The birthday celebration is sort of in the morning. I have while Elm organized the root cellar each morning, Faye watered the seed. So again, we have sort of a clear morning there. Blah, 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 blah. Down here we have a lot of new stuff. So Nikki's asking, do you think it'll actually grow? His voice muffled by the bandana. They were almost finished using the weed rot on the cornfield, and Rick was trying to enjoy the last moments of shade before they emerged into the afternoon's full heat. The sweat stain on his back had mostly dried, and it felt good not to bend over every few steps to attack weeds with the metal sprayer. So there's a lot of stuff I'm doing here. I am trying to move them through the scene. That's one of my goals. Rick is enjoying the shade. We're in the shade. Sensory detail. Before they emerged into the afternoon's full heat, time of day. So we had morning, now it's afternoon. The heat. The weather, that's a nice sensory detail. The sweat stain on his back is mostly dry. Sensory detail. And also, it felt good not to bend over to attack weeds with the metal sprayer. I feel like this is getting us into Rick's head, which is something I wanted to do. This is the first time he's trusting Nikki with this chore. So he's thinking about that. And then it felt good not to bend over every few steps. Then this doesn't really make sense. Oh, well, no one had said farm work was easy, Rick reminded himself. That's supposed to be connected to the sweat stain and the fact that he's going to step out into the heat again and he's just going to be sweaty all over again. So, really quickly, we can move it. It felt good not to bend over every few steps to attack weeds with a metal sprayer. And the sweat stain on his back had mostly dried. But it would be back. Oh, well, no one had said farm work was easy, Rick reminded himself. So again, trying to get him in his head, Rick grunted in response to Nikki's question. I added all this extra stuff after the question. So I want to remind readers that there was a question. Do you think it'll actually grow? Rick grunted. Do you reckon it's really magic? Nikki asked, raising his voice as they neared the flower patch against one wall of the house where Faye had planted her seed. So, again, trying to move us through the scene. They're constantly moving. They're not just standing talking to each other. He's working his way down the rows of corn. Now they're getting near the house, and we get to see Faye. We get to see another character. The girl was still there, still singing to the sea. Great sensory detail. She's singing songs to the sea. That's something that I mention up here. In between mucking out the stables and sharpening tools, Rick and Nikki found Faye singing an unending series of nursery rhymes to the sea. Every day the seed didn't sprout, she sang a little louder. So this image of her really belting out some song. Jacob caught the goblin's tail, goblin's tail, goblin's tail, like Mary had a little lamb. She shrieked. No amount of love for the girl could make her singing any less awful. On the plus side, Rick hadn't seen any birds snacking on the corn. So a little bit of humor. We're again seeing some of Rick's thoughts. We're getting more into his point of view. We're learning who he is. I have a better idea of who Rick is now. I mean, when I started the story, he was completely different. And I like the contrast. I like the comparison, the juxtaposition. Even though the singing is awful, there haven't been any birds snacking on the corn. So the scarecrow is getting a break because her voice is doing all of its work. And there's the question: Do you reckon it's really magic? Rick had to think about that one. This needs a little bit of work. Rework because of the distance between the question and this thought. Spreading the weed rot required more attention than most tasks. Okay, then again, he wasn't doing it this time. With a steady hand, Nikki squirted a tight circle of poison. Now see, and that's the other problem. I don't mention that up here. I don't mention that Rick's not the one doing the work. Nikki's the one doing the work. So I'm going to have to keep an eye on that. While Rick worked the boy's question over like a roasting potato. Yeah. Nikki squirted a tight circle of poison on all the weeds while Rick worked the boy's question over like a roasting potato. I was trying to think of a good farm image, something very simple, like a roasting potato. You're constantly turning it so it gets cooked on all sides, possibly. and they're growing potatoes on the farm. I'm really trying to use things from the farm as much as possible. So you can see I set all these goals and I'm really just sort of ticking them off as I'm going along. And then I thought, oh, Mint's pesticides always kept away the cutworms and aphids, several of which lay as evidence at Rick's feet. So he's not just thinking about Mint's pesticides. We actually see the evidence. So we're seeing some bugs. Bugs are a big part of nature. We need to have those in there. Birds, bugs. The merchant had some talent with the art, meaning he could recognize the magic in people and objects. Rick's thinking about whether the seed could be magic. No reason to think otherwise, Rick said. Yeah, so that all fits. This is just the tiniest bit of world building. There's a magic, it's called the art, and we have this little bit of information that the merchant would know if the seed was magical. This part I'm going to cut. I had a thought. I typed it down. It seemed interesting at the time. Looking back, just doesn't work. Interrupts the flow. And then, okay, so you can see a lot of this. He's moving, right? They're moving. He's thinking. But Nicky's moving. He's, squirting poison on the weeds, thinking, talks, and then after a squirt of weed rot for the final bit of leech vine, I just thought of a random name for the plant, for the weeds. They stepped onto the path between fields. Rick tightened his muscles, bracing as the sun's full attention struck him like one of Elm's backslaps, while Nicky actually turned his head upwards as if welcoming the heat. Sensory details. The sun. Him moving, him tightening his muscles. Contrast. Nicky actually embracing the heat. A callback to farming's not easy. Farming was a young man's job, and the one they wanted least. Couldn't the boy see how well suited he was for it? Getting into Rick's head and reminding us of the tension. Young man doesn't want to be on the farm, but he's so good. He's so good at the farming. And there's going to be more of that soon. But what kind of magic does it hold? So I moved that. All my indents are too far over. Okay. So Nicky's thinking, he's brainstorming ideas, what it could do. Will it be a stalk reaching up into the clouds, or maybe it's one of those plants that eats bugs? So like a Venus flytrap, only it'll be bigger and help keep the farm clear of rodents. Maybe even crows. He chuckled at the thought, and behind his bandana, Rick allowed himself a smile. So Nicky chuckled. I'll probably have to move that. Rick allowed himself a smile behind his bandana. And that's important because a thought here about the boy Rick used to be, that he still clings to some of that boyish charm. No, a thought here about the boy Nicky used to be. So getting into Rick's head. At that moment, his son is saying he's being so youthful in that moment, imagining, daydreaming about a plant that's going to eat crows. There's this feeling of him being caught between worlds. He's thinking like a farmer about a problem and how to solve it, but it's a very childish idea of how to solve it. A magic plant that would be like a giant Venus flytrap and eat crows. So he's thinking about the boy Nicky used to be, that he still clings to some of that boyish charm, and Rick hopes his son never loses it. And then, which is exactly what would happen if he left the farm. Life would become a whole lot more complicated. No less dirty or bloody, but it would be of a kind nothing could prepare him for. You know, on the farm, he butchers animals and he gets dirty, but he wants to go out and be a soldier. It's going to be an entirely different thing killing, another human or killing some kind of humanoid invaders. And it's going to be dirty too. And then I thought Rick could also look over at Mary and think about how she's also growing. So there's a nice transition there from Nikki, and then he thinks about his second child and how she's also growing big, bursting with personality. He might catch a glimpse of Elm in the kitchen, smiling to herself at the meal she was preparing. There's a lot that I'm trying to fit in there, brainstorm there, about those relationships. I had that goal in the back of my mind, and this seemed like a really good place to put it. And then Nikki's thinking, unless Faye's pile of manure makes it grow too big, Nikki continued. Yeah, stop changing this to Nike. And then I wanted to add Mary brushing a horse. Ellen pops over, covering her mouth with a hand. These are thoughts I had. I'm not sure where I'll add them. Nikki glanced over his shoulder. Okay, so this is an important part because Rick was smiling. So we might add, Rick's smile grew back bigger than before. Have the smile slip into a scowl or a wistful drooping of his eyes as he looks back on the past and toward his children's future. So Rick is smiling at the thought of Nikki's daydream, but that leads him down this path of how his kids are growing up, and it's bittersweet. He's really happy with the people that they're growing into, but he's definitely sad that they're growing up. They're growing up so quickly. And they're probably all going to leave the farm. Nikki wants to leave. The girls generally leave. They get married and they leave with their husband. But then Nikki will say, unless Faye's pile of manure makes it grow too big and it ends up eating all the pigs and chickens. So again, it's a kind of funny thing. Rick's smile comes back, and then Nikki glanced over at his shoulder, and I had him frowning at whatever he saw on his father's face. That's going to change. And then this will have to change. I still like the image of him squinting. I want to keep that if I can. But I want Nikki to see his father telltale turning up of his features, a softness to it, a joy to it. He knows that behind his father's mask bandana that he's smiling. And he thinks he's in a good mood. So he's not going to frown. He's going to perk up probably. He's going to look encouraged. I want to remind us who's talking. Rick said, "Guess we'll see. Focus on the weeds. They're easy enough to hit." Nikki said, "Spraying the first growth of some kind of plant name." I already used leech vine of we'll call it something grass, maybe, of I'm thinking of like drip grass. I don't know why. That's what pops into my head. I'll play with it later. I just want to get something down. Growth of drip grass around the tomatoes. Tomato vines. But okay, but the focus here is he's spraying that he moved as if he'd been as if it weren't his first time handling the sprayer, as if he'd done the same chore for countless seasons, especially since I started practicing archery. Remind myself that that's all new. Okay, what else did I add? Oh, Rick started to groan but held it back. He knew where Nikki was headed. That backwards glance must have been to gauge his mood, and he'd still been smiling, opening himself up wide for what came next. So, talking about archery. Weeds don't move, Rick said. Enemy soldiers do. Weeds also don't beg for their lives or haunt your dreams. The recruiter will be around, blah, 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 blah. And then we get to the end. So I made some changes. I hope you enjoyed that video. Look in the description down below. There's a lot more that you can find. My blog, my self-published novel. I have a stream on Twitch, and there are a lot of other YouTube videos. From the Height of a Mind, I'm Mike.